All right, so now I want to talk about the Byrd rule. Now, most Senate bills need 60 votes, but budget bills, called reconciliation bills, only need 50. The Byrd rule limits these 50 vote bills to items only affecting spending or revenue, and it can't add to deficits beyond 10 years. Non budget items must be removed, and some parts of the bill must be temporary, so they don't add to deficits beyond 10 years. In simple terms, for reconciliation bills, the Byrd rule says you can't sneak in unrelated stuff that has nothing to do with the budget or add to deficits beyond 10 years. And if you try, those provisions can be challenged and removed. And I want to say, two more things. Number one, you'll see at that bottom where it said it can be removed. Byrd rule challenges can be made by senators, but they can also be made by the parliamentarian. So right now in the Senate, uh, the parliamentarian struck with the mighty pen and said, there were a handful of provisions that violated the Byrd rule, and it was her suggestion that they be removed. Senators also have the power to challenge provisions in a reconciliation bill under the Byrd rule because reconciliation bills are not eligible for filibuster. Uh, we have seen it before where chambers throw everything together into one, violating the Byrd rule because it's a quick way to get it through because of that inability to participate in the filibuster. Now, challenging a provision under the Byrd rule. So you'll see all of them on the screen right here. The two in blue are the ones that are applicable currently from the One Big Beautiful Bill. But these are the parameters for challenging a provision. So it doesn't change spending or revenue, increases the deficit beyond the budget window, is outside the jurisdiction of the committee handling the bill, has a budgetary effect that is quote unquote merely coincidental to its non-budgetary components, or if it makes changes to Social Security.